Why do we often feel like we're falling behind, like others are doing better, moving faster, or living lives that somehow seem more valid than our own? This feeling of being worse than others isn't just a fleeting insecurity. It's a deeply embedded perception shaped by how our minds process information, how our societies define worth, and how we interpret what we see around us. It touches nearly everyone, at some point or another, and it's more than just a personal flaw or lack of confidence. This project explores a different truth, that feeling unsuccessful is not proof that you are. That emotion often stems from distorted thinking, from comparing apples to oranges, and from a misunderstanding of the variables that shape success. Using a scientific and multidisciplinary lens, we'll uncover how your mind, biology, social environment, cultural context, and even math and physics all interact to influence your perception of your own progress. Our goal is to dismantle the illusion, the one that says you're not enough unless you're constantly achieving. And in its place, we'll build a more accurate, kinder framework that proves this. Your path isn't wrong. It's just different. And that difference is not only okay, it's essential. Why do we constantly measure ourselves against other people? This question is at the heart of so much anxiety, dissatisfaction, and perceived failure. The truth is, the human mind is designed to compare, not because it's flawed, but because comparison was once a tool for survival. It helped our ancestors know where they stood in a group, who was a potential threat, who was a potential ally, and what behaviors were rewarded or punished. But in today's hyper-connected world, this ancient instinct has collided with modern realities. And the result? A deep and chronic sense that we're never quite enough. Let's look at what's really happening under the surface. At the core of comparison lies social identity theory, developed by psychologists Henri Tajfel and John Turner. This theory explains that we define ourselves largely through the groups we belong to: family, community, nationality, profession, gender, social class, even online fandoms. But it doesn't stop there. We don't just identify with our group, we also compare it to others. And from those comparisons, we derive our status, self-worth, and sense of value. You might think, well, I'm not that group-oriented, but it doesn't matter. These comparisons happen automatically, unconsciously. It's how we make sense of ourselves in the world. The brain wants to locate itself in a map, not just a physical one, but a psychological, social, and cultural one. Now enters social comparison theory, proposed by Leon Festinger. He suggested that when we're unsure how to evaluate ourselves, we look to others for cues. There are two types of comparisons we make: upward and downward. Upward comparisons happen when we look at someone we perceive as better off than we are, more successful, more talented, more attractive, more respected. Downward comparisons, on the other hand, involve looking at people we believe are worse off. Both types have their psychological functions. Downward comparisons can temporarily boost self-esteem. They make us feel safer, more capable, even lucky. But we don't make those nearly as often, especially in a world of Instagram, LinkedIn, and nonstop success stories. Upward comparison dominates our mental space. And this is where it becomes toxic, because when you compare yourself to someone above you, at least in the metric you're focusing on, you rarely consider the full picture. You don't see the sleepless nights, the privilege, the support systems, the mental health struggles, the failures behind the scenes. You see the highlight reel. You see the shiny, well-edited version of success. And your brain, craving certainty and answers, fills in the blanks with assumptions. They're better. I'm behind. I must not be doing enough. But here's something critical. Upward comparison isn't inherently bad. In some contexts, it can inspire us to grow. It can show us what's possible. But without context, empathy, or perspective, it doesn't motivate. It shames. And shame doesn't drive change, it paralyzes. This is where cognitive distortions come in. The sneaky, irrational patterns of thought that distort reality. One of the most common is all or nothing thinking, the belief that if you're not wildly successful, then you're a failure. There's no in between. Either you've made it, or you're wasting your life. This mindset flattens the complexity of real life into a binary code. Progress gets ignored. Small wins don't count. The journey itself gets erased in favor of a single, idealized destination. Another distortion is mental filtering, focusing exclusively on the negative, while filtering out anything positive. You could receive 10 compliments and 1 criticism, and your brain will replay that 1 criticism on a loop. Or you might complete a project, meet a goal, or get praised for your work, but you'll dismiss it as luck or not that impressive because your internal standard is always moving higher. Emotional reasoning is another trap. The belief that if you feel like a failure, then you must be one. This is incredibly common. You look around, feel behind, and conclude that those emotions are proof of your inferiority. But emotions are not facts. They're signals, often shaped by your environment, your beliefs, and your neurochemistry. Then there's the Dunning-Kruger effect, one of the most ironic and powerful cognitive biases. In simple terms, it says that people with lower ability in a given area tend to overestimate their competence, while people with higher ability tend to underestimate it. Why? Because the more you know, the more you become aware of what you don't know. Self-awareness grows with skill, and so does self-doubt. Think about that for a moment. Some of the most competent people feel like frauds, not because they are, but because they have the capacity to self-reflect and see nuance. That's imposter syndrome. It's not evidence of incompetence. It's often evidence of intelligence and growth. But the mind misinterprets it as failure. Now layer on the spotlight effect, the illusion that people are constantly watching and judging us. In reality, most people are far too absorbed in their own insecurities to be focusing on yours. But our brains don't operate that way. They assume a constant audience. And if we assume we're being watched, we also assume we're being evaluated. This creates a persistent pressure to perform and an ongoing fear of not measuring up. All of this, the identity theories, the comparison dynamics, the distortions, the biases, adds up to a brain that is frequently telling you stories that aren't true. Stories about how you're not enough. Stories about how everyone else has it together. Stories about how your timeline is too slow, your life is too messy, your achievements are too small. But these are just that, stories. They're not facts. They're interpretations shaped by biology, psychology, and culture. And here's the good news. Once you understand the mechanisms behind these patterns, you can start to rewrite the narrative. You can begin to catch the distortions in the act. You can notice when your mind is comparing without context, or when your self-evaluation is being filtered through a bias. You can start to ask different questions. Instead of, why am I not there yet? You can ask, what does progress look like for me? Instead of, why am I not as successful as them? You can ask, what do I actually value, and am I living by that? You can define your own metrics, not borrowed ones. And perhaps most importantly, you can practice self-compassion, not as a luxury, but as a strategy. Studies in psychology show that people who are kind to themselves are more resilient, more motivated, and more mentally healthy. Self-compassion isn't laziness. It's clarity. It allows you to see yourself more accurately, not through a lens of shame, but through a lens of understanding. So if you feel like you're constantly behind, or like you're not enough, know this: your brain is not broken. It's doing what it was wired to do: compare, categorize, protect. But the context has changed. The world is different. You have more inputs than ever, more pressure than ever, more access to other people's curated lives than any generation before you. The mind didn't evolve for this much visibility. But with awareness, with science, and with kindness, you can begin to shift your internal world. You can stop mistaking comparison for truth. You can stop confusing distorted thinking for reality. And you can start seeing yourself, not through the warped mirror of comparison, but through the lens of real, evolving, and deeply human progress. Your path doesn't need to look like anyone else's. It just needs to be yours. Let's go even deeper, beyond culture, beyond social constructs, and into evolution, into the roots of human nature. Why do we compare ourselves to others so instinctively? Why does someone else's success feel like a threat? Why does social status matter so much, even when we tell ourselves it doesn't? The answer lies in our biology. Not just the biology of modern humans, but the ancient, survival-focused wiring of our ancestors. Long before cities, currencies, or careers, we lived in tight-knit tribal groups. Survival wasn't about climbing corporate ladders or reaching personal milestones. It was about access to food, safety, and reproductive opportunities, all of which were influenced by social rank. If you were respected in your group, you had more protection, better mating chances, and higher survival odds for your offspring. If you were rejected or left behind, you were in danger. Literally. This is why your brain evolved to pay close attention to status cues, to compare, to notice who was ahead, who was liked, who was rising, and who was falling. These weren't just passing observations, they were life-and-death calculations. And those instincts didn't disappear just because society changed. They followed us. They're still running in the background of your mind, even now, even when the stakes are no longer about survival. Look at our closest relatives, primates. In chimpanzee and bonobo groups, social hierarchies are incredibly important. Chimps use grooming, alliances, and even shows of force to move up in rank. The higher their status, the better their access to resources and mates. Lower-ranking individuals get fewer choices, less food, and more stress. The stress of social exclusion, of falling in the hierarchy, triggers real physical consequences. Sound familiar? We may have smartphones and salaries now, but the emotional architecture is strikingly similar. The stress you feel when someone your age becomes wildly successful, the envy when a peer gets recognition you were hoping for, those feelings aren't random. They're echoes, deep, evolutionary signals that say, your position is threatened. Act now. But here's the twist. The environment has changed, but the wiring hasn't. Your brain still reacts to a promotion, a viral post, or someone's perfect vacation the same way it would to a shift in tribal rank 50,000 years ago. It thinks, threat. It floods you with stress hormones. It makes you feel like you're falling behind in a race, even though there's no actual finish line. Now let's talk about envy. Often seen as a toxic emotion, something to suppress or be ashamed of. But envy evolved for a reason. It's a social emotion designed to highlight goals. When someone in your group succeeded, your brain didn't just register jealousy. It got motivated. That's possible. That's something I should aim for. Envy was a trigger for effort, for learning, for adaptation. The problem today isn't that we feel envy. The problem is overexposure. We see too many people in too many domains doing too many things better than us, and we see it all day long. Our brain isn't designed to compare with thousands of strangers at once. In tribal life, you might compare yourself to 10 or 20 people. Now, you can scroll through hundreds of curated lives before breakfast. That creates a constant sense of deficiency, like you're always missing something, always behind, always less than. And then there's social signaling, the act of displaying traits or achievements that raise your perceived status in the eyes of others. This, too, has ancient roots. From elaborate feathers in birds to roaring displays in gorillas, animals show off to communicate dominance, strength, or mating value. Humans do the same. But instead of feathers or roars, we use cars, clothes, job titles, relationship photos, or intellectual flexes. These aren't just ego displays. They're subconscious attempts to secure social position. They're bids for relevance, belonging, admiration. And they're not bad, they're natural. But when we consume other people's signals without context, we forget that these displays are curated. We see someone's social signal, a TED Talk, a wedding, a published book, and we interpret it as a whole life. We assume they're happier, more stable, more confident. But all we've seen is one signal, one feather. Another key piece of this puzzle is error in perception. Evolution didn't design us to see the world clearly, it designed us to survive. So your brain often overreacts to perceived social threats. You might interpret silence as rejection, someone else's success as your failure, or a small mistake as catastrophic. These are not rational conclusions, they're protective assumptions. They come from the ancient brain, the part that's still watching for predators, still calculating risk, still trying to avoid exile. And here's where it gets really interesting. The part of your brain responsible for this kind of social vigilance is the same part that processes physical pain. Studies have shown that social exclusion lights up the same neural pathways as being physically hurt. That feeling you get when you're left out, when you're not recognized, when someone else rises while you feel stuck. That's not just in your head. That's your brain registering a wound. But wounds can heal, and they heal faster when you understand their origin. You're not broken for feeling left behind. You're not shallow for feeling envy. You're human. You're wired for comparison, but also for growth, connection, and adaptation. You can't stop your brain from noticing status or success, but you can reinterpret what it means. You can remind yourself, this is an ancient alarm bell. It doesn't mean I'm failing. It means I'm alive. And with awareness, you can move from reaction to reflection, from envy to curiosity, from fear to agency. Because comparison isn't just about where you are, it's about how you interpret where you are. And interpretation is where transformation begins. Your ancient brain wants you to survive, but your conscious mind, it can help you thrive. Imagine waking up and immediately looking into a mirror. Not just any mirror, but one that reflects the best moments, best bodies, best jobs, best homes, and best vacations of thousands of people. That's what social media is. It's a digital mirror, but a distorted one, designed not to show you reality, but to show you performance. The moment you open an app, you're in a psychological theater. You're not seeing raw, unfiltered human experience. You're seeing highlights, edited clips, posed photos, framed moments selected for maximum impact. And yet, your brain processes it as reality. Why? Because the human brain evolved in small groups, where most of what you saw was real. There was no editing, no filters, no algorithms. So when you scroll through someone's feed and see success, beauty, adventure, love, your brain assumes this is how life looks for them all the time. You're comparing your internal world, your insecurities, your doubts, your messy process, to someone else's external broadcast. It's not a fair fight. You're seeing the tip of their iceberg while being intimately familiar with the weight of your own. This effect, psychologists call it contextless comparison, is uniquely modern. You see someone post about publishing their first novel, landing their dream job, or launching a business. What you don't see are the 67 rejection letters, the years of financial strain, or the mental health crashes that happened in between. You just see the final, polished outcome. And your brain, desperate for reference points, starts doing math it was never meant to do. They're 26, and they've already done that. They've traveled to 5 countries this year. What am I doing wrong? They're married. They're glowing. They've figured it all out. You're not just comparing, you're interpreting. And often, you're misinterpreting. Social media platforms don't just allow this distortion. They amplify it. Algorithms are designed to promote content that gets engagement, and engagement comes from extremes. The most dramatic stories, the most luxurious lives, the most aesthetic routines rise to the top. This creates a false sense of norm. You begin to believe that most people are thriving, beautiful, successful, and productive all the time. But that's an illusion. Even the people posting those moments often feel inadequate. Studies have shown that many influencers, even those who appear confident and successful, report high levels of anxiety, loneliness, and burnout. They, too, are trapped in the performance loop. They, too, feel the pressure to keep proving their worth online. Now let's talk numbers. A study from the University of Pennsylvania found that reducing social media use to just 30 minutes a day significantly decreased levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness in college students. Other studies show a strong correlation between time spent on platforms like Instagram and increased body dissatisfaction, FOMO, fear of missing out, and lowered self-esteem, especially among young people. TikTok, for example, shows content based not on who you follow, but what the algorithm decides is relevant. That means you could be shown a 19-year-old millionaire giving business advice, or a fitness model with genetics and lighting you'll never match. Not because you chose to see them, but because the platform knows those images trigger engagement. YouTube paints success as a formula. How I made 6 figures in 6 months. Morning routines of millionaires. 10x your life with these habits. These aren't just videos. They're scripts for how you should be living. And if your reality doesn't match, it's easy to feel like you've failed. But what if you zoomed out? What if you saw these platforms not as accurate representations of people's lives, but as edited, profit-driven storytelling machines? What if you stopped measuring your life against people whose job it is to appear successful? That's not to say social media is inherently bad. It can connect, inspire, educate. It can show you possibilities, give you tools, open your worldview. But it has to be used consciously. Otherwise, it becomes a lens that distorts your self-perception. Imagine this. Every time you scroll, you're not just seeing content. You're activating a mental feedback loop. You're saying to your brain, this is who I should be. This is what I should have. This is where I should be by now. And over time, that loop becomes a belief system. Not because it's true, but because it's repeated. You begin to chase metrics, likes, followers, aesthetics. You begin to shape your identity around what gets approval rather than what brings meaning. You stop asking, do I enjoy this? And start asking, will this perform? This is what the philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls achievement society, a culture where we're no longer forced to obey, but instead internalize the pressure to constantly self-optimize. Social media fuels that pressure by turning life into a performance. Not because you're weak, but because the platforms were built to do exactly that. But here's the power you still hold. You can choose how you relate to it. You can unfollow people who trigger insecurity, not because they're bad, but because your peace matters more than their content. You can curate your feed to include creators who are vulnerable, real, diverse, honest. You can step away from the apps when they become noise instead of nourishment. You can remind yourself, daily, that visibility is not the same as value. You can ask, is this making me more connected or more anxious? Is this inspiring me or pressuring me? Do I want to live my life or just perform it? And here's something even more radical. You can start sharing your real self, not for likes, but for freedom. You can break the loop by being the person who says, I don't have it all figured out, and that's okay. Because that honesty, that vulnerability, is what truly connects us, far more than curated perfection ever could. The mirror will always be there. The digital reflection isn't going away, but you get to decide what you believe about it. You get to choose how much weight you give to what you see. And most importantly, you get to turn away from the mirror when you need to return to your own experience, your own timeline, your own definition of success. Not everything worth living for can be posted. Let's shift gears from psychology and culture to the physical systems that run underneath everything you do. Your biology. Because there's something that almost no one talks about when it comes to success, productivity, and self-comparison. We don't all run on the same internal clock. Your brain, your body, your hormones, your sleep cycles, these aren't standard. They're not meant to be. You are a biological system with unique wiring. So when you compare yourself to someone else's pace, routine, or energy, without factoring in biology, you're misunderstanding the variables entirely. Let's begin with circadian rhythms. These are the natural 24-hour cycles that regulate your sleep, wakefulness, hunger, body temperature, and even emotional reactivity. They're built into your biology and are influenced by light, genetics, and environment. But here's the crucial point. Not everyone's rhythm is the same. Some people are morning chronotypes, early risers, most productive before noon. Others are evening chronotypes, night owls who come alive after sunset. And many people fall somewhere in the middle. This isn't about discipline or laziness. It's about internal timing. Yet, our culture overwhelmingly rewards the morning type. From school bells to office hours to hustle culture's obsession with 5 a.m. routines, we've created a system that celebrates one rhythm and pathologizes the others. If you're not up at dawn, grinding and journaling and working out, you're seen as unmotivated. But if your biology doesn't function optimally at that hour, you're not underperforming, you're misaligned. Research from chronobiology shows that forcing people to work outside their biological peak leads to cognitive decline, mood disorders, and even increased risk for chronic illness. Sleep scientist Dr. Matthew Walker calls this social jet lag, the dissonance between your natural rhythm and the one society demands. And just like actual jet lag, it comes with brain fog, fatigue, irritability, and reduced performance. So if you're comparing your productivity to someone else's without knowing their chronotype, you're comparing two different operating systems. You're expecting your phone to run like a different model, same speed, same battery life, same screen. But that's not how it works. Now add in hormonal cycles. These vary dramatically between individuals and can change based on age, sex, stress, diet, and sleep. Estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, melatonin, insulin. These hormones influence everything from focus and energy to resilience and mood. Some people wake up with high cortisol, ready to move. Others have a delayed hormonal spike. Some people experience huge swings throughout the month, affecting motivation, clarity, and stamina. Imagine two people starting the same task. One has slept deeply, hormones balanced, emotionally regulated. The other is underslept, hormonally depleted, and neurologically stressed. Now compare their output. Does it make sense to expect the same result? And what about neurodivergence? ADHD, autism spectrum traits, bipolar tendencies, these aren't flaws. They're neurological variations. They come with different patterns of attention, focus, energy, creativity, and motivation. But when you judge yourself using a standard created for neurotypical people, a linear routine, an 8-hour workday, a consistent emotional state, you might feel broken. In reality, you're just mismeasured. Then there's energy capacity. Some people have a naturally higher energy baseline. Others need more rest, more downtime, more recharge. This is affected by mitochondrial efficiency, metabolism, even gut microbiome. You're not a machine with infinite battery. Your body has limits, and honoring them is not a weakness. It's intelligence. But the modern world rarely talks about these differences. Instead, it offers one-size-fits-all advice. Wake up early. Work harder. Just be consistent. And if that doesn't work for you, the conclusion you draw is, something's wrong with me. But what if there isn't? What if your timeline is slower because your nervous system needs more recovery? What if your focus comes in short bursts because that's your natural pattern? What if your value isn't in how fast or how often you produce, but in the quality, depth, or originality of what you create? Productivity is not a universal metric. It's not one rhythm, one shape, one output level. It's a moving target, defined by who you are, how you're built, and what you're navigating. And that includes genetics. Some people have genetic traits that favor endurance, others that favor speed. Some have high dopamine sensitivity. They get energized by novelty and competition. Others have lower sensitivity and need more structure, more repetition. Your gene expression, shaped by ancestry, environment, and random chance, affects your stamina, your mood, your adaptability. Now think about that. If even your cells are unique, how could your journey ever be identical to someone else's? That's the quiet truth underneath all of this. Biology matters. Physiology matters. Your path isn't just shaped by motivation. It's shaped by molecules, by rhythms, by systems operating beneath awareness. So the next time you're tempted to compare your output, your habits, your speed to someone else's, pause. Ask, are we built the same? Are we running on the same schedule? Are we even playing by the same physiological rules? And if the answer is no, then their pace is not your failure. The goal isn't to copy their path. It's to find your rhythm, your body's timing, your brain's sweet spot, your unique pulse in the world. Because when you live aligned with that, even if it looks slower, softer, or stranger, it's not just more sustainable. It's more powerful. Let's talk about something that radically shapes success, but rarely gets acknowledged in the self-help narratives we consume. Inequality. Not just financial inequality, but social inequality, cultural inequality, educational inequality. The truth is, we don't all start at the same place. And pretending that we do is one of the greatest illusions behind modern comparison. When you look at someone your age who's ahead, it's easy to think they worked harder or they were more focused, more disciplined. And sometimes that's true. But often, what you're seeing is not just individual effort. You're seeing accumulated advantage. What sociologists call the Matthew effect, from the biblical line. To those who have, more will be given. In simpler terms, success stacks. If you start with more, money, support, education, connections, you're more likely to get even more. If you start with less, the climb is steeper, slower, more exhausting. And yet, most people don't factor that in when comparing themselves. We assume the playing field is level, but it never was. Think of two people launching a business. One has access to startup capital, mentorship, a family safety net, and a network of professionals. The other has student debt, a full-time job, no safety net, and zero social capital. They may have the same dream. They may work just as hard, but the outcomes won't look the same. Not because one is more capable, but because one started the race with running shoes and the other barefoot, uphill. Sociologist Pierre Bourdieu explained this through the concept of capital, not just economic capital, money, but social capital, who you know, cultural capital, what you know, and symbolic capital, what status you hold in a given field. These forms of capital shape your mobility in invisible ways. If your parents went to college, you're more likely to understand how to navigate higher education. If your social circle includes professionals, you're more likely to hear about opportunities. If you speak the language of success, dress codes, jargon, norms, you're more likely to be accepted in certain spaces. And then there's habitus, Bourdieu's term for the unconscious patterns of thought, behavior, and perception shaped by your upbringing. It's not just what resources you have, it's how you see the world, what you think is possible, what risks feel available to you. Someone raised in a stable, encouraging environment may feel empowered to try, fail, and try again. Someone raised in instability may feel the constant need to play it safe, avoid mistakes, and protect what little they have. These aren't excuses, they're explanations. And they matter, because without recognizing these invisible forces, we start blaming ourselves for things we were never in control of. We internalize systemic failure as personal failure. We look at someone else's timeline and ask, why am I not there yet? Without realizing that we didn't even start in the same place. Consider education. access to high-quality schools, tutors, extracurriculars, and college counseling. These things massively influence future outcomes, but they're not equally distributed. If you grew up in an underfunded school district, or you were the first in your family to go to college, or you had to work during high school to support your family, then your path to success already had barriers built in. And yet, the myth of meritocracy tells you that effort alone determines outcome. It doesn't. Effort matters, but only in context. A seed planted in fertile soil grows differently than one planted in concrete. That's not the seed's fault. That's environment. Now think about time. We're constantly told we need to make it by 25, 30, 35, as if there's an expiration date on legitimacy. But those deadlines are made up. They're not biological truths. They're cultural artifacts. And they're especially harsh on people who had to delay dreams because of caregiving, illness, financial hardship, or systemic barriers. This pressure to be exceptional early, to be a millionaire by 30, to have a TED Talk before 35, is rooted in privilege. It assumes you had time, money, and access from the start. It erases the people who had to take detours, rest, survive. And it ignores the quiet reality. Many of the most meaningful lives unfold slowly. Some people go to therapy at 40 and begin healing for the first time. Some publish their first book at 50. Some find their calling after retirement. This isn't failure. It's life on a different schedule. And then there's the illusion of equal opportunity. In theory, anyone can rise. In practice, the playing field is tilted by racism, sexism, classism, ableism, homophobia, and more. Discrimination doesn't always look like open hostility. Sometimes it looks like being passed over quietly, being left out of the room where decisions are made, not being seen as the right fit. These invisible walls shape who gets ahead and who gets stuck explaining why they haven't yet. So if you're looking at someone else's success and thinking, I should be there by now, ask yourself, did we start with the same resources? Did we have the same environment? Did we face the same barriers? And if the answer is no, then the comparison isn't just unhelpful. It's inaccurate. Success isn't just about mindset. It's about access. It's about safety. It's about timing. It's about support. And none of those are evenly distributed. This isn't about giving up or blaming the world. It's about naming reality so you can stop blaming yourself. So you can stop holding yourself to a standard that was never built for your context. So you can grieve what you didn't have and still build what you want next. Because here's the truth. Your path is valid, even if it's longer. Your timeline is worthy, even if it's slower. Your progress counts, even if it's quiet. The world doesn't reward fairness. But that doesn't mean your worth is up for debate. Your life is not late. Your story is not behind. Your effort is not invisible, even if it hasn't been recognized yet. Let's pause for a moment and ask, what even is success? Not what it should be, but how it's actually presented, sold, and consumed. The truth is, many of us are chasing something we never consciously defined. We're chasing a story, a myth, a narrative handed down by culture, media, and ideology. And it's time to question it. In Western societies, especially in the United States, success is often framed as a personal conquest. The self-made man is the central figure, someone who rises from nothing, pulls himself up by his bootstraps, and through grit, willpower, and intelligence, becomes wealthy, respected, and powerful. This image is everywhere, in movies, biographies, political speeches, LinkedIn posts. And it sounds inspiring. But let's look closer. The self-made man myth is just that, a myth. No one builds a life in isolation. No one achieves anything meaningful without infrastructure, support, mentorship, or luck. Yet this myth persists because it props up other beliefs. That success is purely individual, that failure is always personal, and that if you're struggling, it's because you didn't try hard enough. It's a cultural story that turns systemic issues into personal shame. This myth also glorifies hyperproductivity. It equates worth with output. Hustle becomes holy. Rest becomes weakness. If you're not building, scaling, optimizing, what are you even doing? The narrative says you should want more. More income, more visibility, more followers, more wins. And if you don't want more, you're playing small. But what if you want a slower life? What if you value peace more than prestige? What if you measure success in hours of freedom, not digits in a bank account? These questions don't fit into the dominant Western narrative. Because in this narrative, the goal isn't just to live, it's to win. Life becomes a competition, a ranking system. Someone is always ahead. And if someone is ahead, that means you're behind. Comparison is not a flaw here, it's the fuel. But this is not the only way to live. In many Eastern philosophies and indigenous worldviews, success is not defined by conquest, but by alignment. In Buddhism, the path is internal, liberation from suffering, not accumulation of wealth. In Hindu philosophy, the four goals of life include not just artha, material success, but also dharma, duty, kama, pleasure, and moksha, spiritual liberation. In many indigenous cultures, success is collective. It's about harmony with community and nature, not domination over others. In these frameworks, your worth is not tied to constant growth. It's tied to balance, to being in right relationship with yourself, with others, with the world. The focus shifts from what have I achieved to how have I lived. Compare that to the Western obsession with the billionaire genius. The idea that if someone has money and fame, they must also be wise, enlightened, and worth listening to, regardless of their ethics, relationships, or values. That's not wisdom. That's idolization of outcomes. And here's where it becomes personal. When you grow up in a culture that idolizes achievement, you internalize its metrics. You start believing that success equals income, productivity, public recognition. And if you don't have those things, or don't want them, you begin to feel like you're failing at life. Even if you're deeply kind, even if you're showing up for people, even if you're healing, learning, creating meaning. This is what philosopher Alain de Botton calls status anxiety, the fear that you're not living up to society's definition of a worthy life. And it's not just a feeling. It's baked into our structures. We rank people by job title. We design cities around wealth. We teach kids to dream of fame. We turn entire identities into brands. But success, real, grounded, human success, is not a brand. It's not a trophy. It's a relationship with yourself and the world that feels meaningful, alive, and aligned with your values. So the question becomes, whose definition of success are you living by? Did you choose it? Or did it come from a movie, a magazine, a parent, an algorithm? Because if your life doesn't match the myth, that doesn't mean you're broken. It might mean the myth was never meant for you. It might mean you're here to live a different story, one that values rest, slowness, art, friendship, service, joy, mystery, one that doesn't need to be posted or measured or monetized. There is a quiet kind of success that rarely gets celebrated. Waking up and feeling okay in your own skin. Building a life where you're not constantly anxious. Having time to walk, to read, to connect. Showing up with integrity, even when no one's watching. Being kind in a cruel world. Letting yourself evolve. You won't get a trophy for that. But maybe you don't need one. Maybe the real revolution is stepping off the path you were never meant to follow. Not because you gave up, but because you finally realized it was never your path to begin with. Now let's take a step back, way back, and look at success not through psychology or sociology, but through the lens of mathematics. Because even here, there's something crucial we often miss. Success isn't linear. It isn't predictable. It's not a clean slope upward. It's chaotic, nonlinear, and highly influenced by random variables, some visible, some invisible. In fact, The very structure of success looks less like a ladder and more like a lightning strike. Sudden, uneven, and shaped by probability more than certainty. This is where chaos theory comes in. Chaos theory, in mathematical terms, refers to systems that appear random but are actually governed by underlying patterns and sensitive to initial conditions. One famous metaphor is the butterfly effect, the idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can eventually cause a tornado in Texas. In other words, small, seemingly insignificant actions or events can lead to massive, unpredictable outcomes. Now apply this to real life. One conversation can change your trajectory. One book, one mentor, one unexpected opportunity, or one seemingly tiny decision, like moving to a different city or applying for a random internship. These aren't always things you can plan. They're emergent. They arise from systems too complex to control, and they often have disproportionate impact. That's why comparing timelines is so misleading. Someone else's overnight success may have started years ago with a random variable they couldn't have predicted or even fully understood. This is also why hard work doesn't always lead to success in the ways we expect, because the outcome is not just determined by effort, but by timing, access, network dynamics, market demand, luck, and the right conditions all colliding at the right moment. That doesn't mean your work is meaningless. It means it's one part of a very large system. In fact, a growing body of research in applied math and complexity science suggests that success operates like a nonlinear function. That means it doesn't grow steadily over time. It spikes. You might work for years with little visible payoff, and then suddenly everything accelerates. Not because you've magically improved, but because the conditions changed. The system tipped. Mathematicians call this fractal growth, a pattern of slow build-up followed by sudden bursts of visible change. It's the opposite of the straight-line graph we're taught to expect. It's how nature works. Rivers, trees, lightning, economies. It's how many careers actually unfold. Most people quit during the plateau phase, not because they're failing, but because they misinterpret the curve. They assume progress should be constant, and when it's not, they feel like they're wasting time. But in a nonlinear system, plateaus are part of the process. They're periods of quiet accumulation, of skills, ideas, relationships, systems, that eventually lead to exponential growth. There's also network theory, the study of how connections between people, ideas, and institutions shape outcomes. And in network theory, one principle stands out. It's not just what you know, it's who you're connected to, and how those connections multiply. In mathematical terms, this is called preferential attachment. Once a node, like a person, company, or idea, gains visibility or value, more people attach to it, making it grow faster. It's why successful people often get more opportunities, even if they're not more talented. Once you're seen as valuable, your visibility multiplies. Not because you changed, but because perception did. This is where luck and timing intersect with math. Imagine two equally skilled people. One happens to meet the right contact at the right moment. That one variable, timing, initiates a cascade. The network responds. The opportunities increase. From the outside, it looks like they're just better. But inside the system, it's just how the math played out. The structure amplified their node. This isn't cynical. It's structural. And once you understand it, you can stop blaming yourself for not being further ahead and start building systems that increase your probability of success over time. You can ask, what small actions can I take that might compound later? What connections can I nurture? Not transactionally, but sincerely. How can I stay in the game long enough for the nonlinear payoff to emerge? Because the game isn't about sprinting. It's about staying. It's about creating conditions where luck is more likely to find you. It's about aligning with systems rather than trying to dominate them. This brings us to probability, the science of chance. In any outcome involving risk, timing, and complexity, there's always an element of uncertainty. And yet, we often ignore that. We treat outcomes as if they were solely the result of character or effort. They're not. They're the result of variables, many outside your control. What does this mean practically? It means you need to stop thinking of success as a guarantee for effort and start thinking of it as a probability function. The more you show up, the more you learn, the more you build relationships, the more you create, the higher your odds. But it will never be certain. And that's okay. That's the nature of complex systems. So if you haven't made it yet, it might not be because you're doing something wrong. It might be because you're still inside the chaos, still inside the buildup, still waiting for the system to tip. And if you've already had some success, understand this too. It wasn't all you. That doesn't make it less meaningful. It makes it more miraculous. We are all swimming in invisible math, algorithms, networks, variables, tipping points. The playing field isn't even. The rules aren't fixed. The timing isn't fair. But the process can still be beautiful. Because when you stop expecting certainty and start understanding complexity, you free yourself from the myth that your life has to follow a perfect curve. You stop looking at someone else's spike and thinking, why not me? You start looking at your plateau and thinking, maybe this is my setup phase. You stop seeing randomness as punishment and start seeing it as possibility. Because success isn't linear. It's emergent. Now, let's enter the world of physics, not to calculate force or friction, but to explore something stranger and more poetic, the quantum world, the reality of identity, the mystery of self-perception. Because as abstract as it sounds, modern physics offers powerful metaphors for understanding why you feel behind, uncertain, or not enough. Let's begin with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. In quantum mechanics, this principle tells us you can't precisely know both the position and the momentum of a particle at the same time. The more accurately you know one, the less accurately you can know the other. Why? Because observing the particle changes it. Observation affects reality. Now apply this to yourself. Every time you try to measure your life, to define who you are, where you are, or how far you've come, you affect the very state you're trying to observe. You simplify it. You distort it. You reduce something dynamic to something static. You say, I'm not successful, or I'm behind. And in that act of measurement, you stop seeing your full complexity. You see a snapshot, not a system in motion. Your identity isn't a fixed point. It's a wave. It's moving, evolving, shifting, even when you're not aware of it. And trying to pin it down with a label or a ranking doesn't clarify who you are. It collapses you into a limited frame. Then there's the concept of superposition, the idea that quantum particles exist in multiple states at once until they're observed. A particle can be here and there. It can be in multiple possibilities simultaneously. The famous example is Schrödinger's cat. Until you open the box, the cat is both alive and dead. Not either slash or both slash and. And here's the metaphor. You, right now, are in superposition. You are growing and resting, learning and doubting, building and healing. You are between versions of yourself, existing in more than one potential at once. You are not just who you were, or even who you are. You are also who you're becoming. The problem is, culture wants certainty. It wants clean identities, final answers, boxes to tick. But humans are quantum systems, messy, nonlinear, full of potential states. You're allowed to be a work in progress. In fact, you always are. Then comes the quantum leap. Often misunderstood as a tiny change, a quantum leap is actually a sudden shift from one energy level to another without passing through intermediate stages. It's not gradual. It's discontinuous. One moment you're here, the next moment, click, you're in a different state. Sound familiar? Have you ever struggled with something for months, felt stuck, doubted yourself endlessly, and then, out of nowhere, something clicked? You understood something. You shifted perspective. You broke through. That's a quantum leap. It's not the result of one heroic act. It's the product of sustained effort, quiet buildup, and nonlinear readiness. Just because change isn't visible doesn't mean it isn't happening. Under the surface, at the quantum level of your life, things are moving, rewiring, reorganizing, preparing for a leap that doesn't follow the usual steps. And finally, there's the observer effect, the phenomenon that simply observing a particle changes its behavior. In quantum experiments, particles act differently when they're being watched. The presence of an observer collapses possibilities into a single outcome. Now consider this. How does being seen affect your identity? How does public visibility, social media, judgment, comparison shape your behavior? When you're constantly observed, you start performing. You start curating. You collapse yourself into a persona, a profile, a brand. You become measurable, and in doing so, you reduce the richness of who you are. But you're more than that. You're not a fixed image. You're a field of probabilities. You're still unfolding. So the invitation is this. Stop trying to measure yourself too soon. Don't collapse the wave. Let the process breathe. Let your identity remain in motion, full of potential, full of contradiction. Let it surprise you. You don't need to always know exactly who you are or where you're going. That uncertainty isn't a flaw. It's the quantum nature of being human. It's the space where real transformation happens. And maybe the most powerful shift isn't external. Maybe it's internal. Maybe the real quantum leap is changing how you observe yourself. With less judgment, more wonder. Less urgency, more patience. Because when the observer changes, so does the outcome. You are not late. You are not broken. You are not stuck. You are a system in motion, full of states, full of variables, full of invisible shifts. You are becoming something no one, not even you, can fully predict. And that's not a problem. That's quantum identity. Let's go even deeper into the brain itself. Because the feelings of inadequacy, the sting of comparison, the urge to chase success, they're not just abstract emotions or cultural side effects. They're wired into your neurochemistry. And the key player behind much of this? Dopamine. Dopamine is often misunderstood. People think of it as the pleasure chemical, but it's more accurate to call it the motivation or anticipation chemical. Dopamine doesn't spike when you receive a reward. It spikes when you expect one. When you're chasing a goal. When you're anticipating recognition, progress, achievement. And this is exactly where the trap begins. Your brain, driven by ancient wiring, is constantly scanning for indicators of status, progress, and reward. This helped our ancestors survive by motivating them to hunt, build alliances, and compete for resources. But in the modern world, that same system is hijacked by external symbols of success. Likes, followers, job titles, attention, wealth. These are the new rewards, and your dopamine system responds to them whether you realize it or not. Now here's the catch. Dopamine is relative. It's not about how well you're doing in some objective sense. It's about how well you're doing compared to what your brain expected. So when you see someone else achieving something, especially if they're younger, more visible, or seemingly less qualified, your brain perceives a loss. Not just intellectually, but chemically. It literally hurts. Neuroscience studies using fMRI show that when people experience social comparison, especially negative comparison, the brain lights up in areas associated with physical pain and threat. Social defeat, rejection, or perceived inferiority triggers the anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that responds to physical injury. So no, you're not just being dramatic when someone else's success stings. It's your nervous system reacting as if you're being pushed out of the tribe. And from an evolutionary standpoint, being excluded from the group meant death. That's how deep this wiring runs. But here's where it gets even more complex. Your dopamine system doesn't just get activated by your own goals. It gets trained by your environment. If you're constantly surrounded by extreme examples of achievement, whether through social media, entertainment, or professional networks, your brain starts adjusting its baseline expectations. You start feeling like you should always be optimizing, always progressing, always doing more. This creates a chronic dopamine imbalance. You're perpetually in a state of anticipation, waiting for the next breakthrough, the next hit of validation. But when the results don't come fast enough, or don't match the scale of what you've consumed, you crash. You feel flat, defeated, behind. Not because you're failing, but because your internal reward system has been overstimulated and then deprived. It's like trying to feel satisfied on a diet of candy, constant spikes, followed by crashes. Real fulfillment, like real food, takes longer, builds slower, and doesn't always come with fireworks. Now let's talk about addiction. Because yes, comparison can become addictive. The dopamine system is highly responsive to variable rewards, just like slot machines. You scroll through TikTok or Instagram, and every few posts, you see something that triggers that dopamine spark. Someone announcing a big win, a viral post, a luxury lifestyle. Your brain perks up. Maybe I could do that. Maybe I should be further ahead. But unlike a slot machine, you're not just gambling with your time. You're gambling with your self-worth. And over time, this constant stimulation rewires your baseline. You feel numb when you're not achieving. Rest starts to feel like laziness. Quiet becomes emptiness. You lose the ability to feel good about small, real progress because your dopamine system has been trained to respond only to big, visible wins. Here's another critical factor: the default mode network, DMN. This is the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on an external task, when you're daydreaming, reflecting, or thinking about yourself. It's closely linked to rumination and self-evaluation. When your dopamine system is out of balance, the DMN can become hyperactive. You overthink. You compare. You spiral, especially late at night, especially when you're tired, especially when you're alone with your thoughts. Now, none of this is your fault. This is biology reacting to environment. Your brain evolved for survival, not for thriving in an attention economy. You were never meant to process hundreds of lives, successes, and signals per hour. You were built to live in a village, not scroll through an infinite feed. But the good news is, you can retrain your brain. Neuroscience shows that the dopamine system is plastic, meaning it can adapt. With consistent practice, you can reset your reward circuit. You can learn to associate dopamine not just with outcomes, but with effort. Not just with attention, but with alignment. For example, you can deliberately shift your focus to process-based goals. Not, I want 100,000 followers, but I want to write something true every day. Not, I need to be famous by 30, but I want to improve at my craft this year. Process goals release dopamine in more stable, sustainable ways. You feel rewarded for showing up, not just for winning. You can also reduce exposure to high-stimulation environments. Unfollow accounts that trigger comparison. Take intentional breaks from social media. Protect your mind like you protect your body, not from information, but from distortion. Because your brain can only work with what it sees. And if it only sees curated success, it will assume you're behind. You can practice dopamine fasting, not to eliminate pleasure, but to reset sensitivity. Let yourself be bored. Do one thing at a time. Relearn the joy of a slow walk, a deep conversation, a creative flow without expectation. Let the small wins count. Most importantly, you can start observing your thoughts without attaching to them. When you feel behind, ask, compared to what? When you feel like a failure, ask, whose timeline am I using? And when you feel numb, ask, have I been rewarding only the outcome, or the effort too? Your brain is not broken. It's responding to a system designed to overwhelm it. But you don't have to live on autopilot. You can build new circuits. You can find your own rhythm. You can anchor success not in spikes of attention, but in sustained connection to your values, your craft, your truth. And in doing so, you don't just heal comparison. You liberate yourself from the chemical trap. You reclaim your mind, not as a scoreboard, but as a space of possibility. You've probably felt it before, that low, creeping sense that you're not measuring up, that somehow other people are living better, faster, clearer lives. That maybe, just maybe, you're doing it wrong. That the way you move through the world, with your delays, doubts, restarts, or rejections, makes you lesser. But the truth is, that's not a fact. It's a formula, one you've unconsciously learned from culture, school, media, family, and society. A formula that says success looks one way: early, visible, linear, and validated. And if your life doesn't fit that mold, the story says you're behind. But science, across disciplines, tells a different story. Psychology reveals that comparison is a distorted lens. It isn't objective. It's built on selective perception, emotional reasoning, and old tribal wiring that misfires in a hyper-connected world. Your mind doesn't show you the whole picture. It shows you the threats, the gaps, the fears. And when you trust that lens too much, you forget how far you've already come. Biology reminds us that each person's system is different. From hormones and circadian rhythms to energy patterns and neural wiring, you are not a copy of anyone else. Your productivity, your energy, your timing, they're not flaws to be fixed. They're part of a unique equation. A different input leads to a different output, so the standard timelines don't apply. Sociology and economics explain that inequality isn't just about money. It's about access, habitus, and invisible capital. Some people are born into support systems, safety nets, and cultural fluency that others never see. When you compare yourself to someone who started 3 steps ahead, but hide those steps behind the word hustle, you're setting yourself up for unnecessary shame. Cultural theory shows us that the very idea of success is a myth, shaped by Western ideals of individualism, competition, and control. You've been taught to believe in the self-made person, in heroic leaps, in perfection by 30. But these are narratives, not laws. Other cultures see growth as a path, not a prize. Process, not performance. Even mathematics reveals that success isn't a straight line. Progress happens in fractals, bursts, and chaos. The butterfly effect tells us that tiny changes ripple outward. The idea of falling behind collapses when you realize life is nonlinear. And sometimes, the biggest breakthroughs follow the longest plateaus. Physics reminds us that measurement changes the system, that you, like a quantum particle, exist in multiple states at once. You can be healing and growing, lost and learning, stuck and evolving. Your identity isn't fixed, it's fluid. And just because it doesn't look complete now doesn't mean it's not real. And neuroscience proves that your brain is not a scoreboard. It's a dynamic, changing system influenced by dopamine, emotion, context, and attention. You can train it. You can heal it. You can learn to reward effort, not just outcome. You can learn to observe comparison without attaching to it. You can rewire the way you see yourself. So when you say, "I'm behind," ask yourself, by what measure? Whose standards? Whose clock? When you feel small, remember that the lens is flawed. That people show highlights, not whole stories. That the game isn't fair and never was. But also, that this isn't cause for despair. Because what all this science reveals is not just how comparison harms you, but how free you actually are. Free to move at your own pace. Free to define your own metrics. Free to honor your unique variables. Free to be nonlinear. Free to fail and still be worthy. Free to be quiet and still valuable. Free to be complex, not behind, not wrong, just human. So here's the truth that this whole journey leads to. You are not a broken version of someone else's path. You are a complete version of your own. Every person is a system, shaped by time, resources, energy, relationships, randomness, culture, and biology. No two systems can be compared. No single metric can define them. And no timeline can contain the full arc of becoming. So maybe the real success isn't reaching a finish line. Maybe it's learning to stay grounded in your own equation, even when others shout there's louder. Maybe it's noticing your progress, however small. Maybe it's showing up today, not as who you think you should be, but as who you are. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. Emotional, psychological, and scientific. Because being yourself, in a world wired to tell you otherwise, isn't just brave. It's rational. Good night.